He had a magnetic presence, effortlessly drawing people in. He spoke with smooth assurance, a man who knew how to sell not just cars but illusions. When Ivy walked into the dealership to purchase a used car, something she could have easily bought outright in cash, she chose instead to keep her financial reality under wraps. Aiden was instantly captivated by her quiet beauty. To him, she was, unlike anyone else, modest, mysterious, and seemingly unentitled. It intrigued him. They began dating, and within 6 months, were swept into a whirlwind romance that ended with a quick courthouse wedding. For a brief time, Ivy felt like she was living in a dream. She truly believed Aiden loved her for who she was, not for what she owned or might one day inherit. She held on to every moment, how he tucked a strand of hair behind her ear, how he looked at her like she was the only person in a room full of noise. Her heart, long shielded by caution and legacy, dared to beat with hope again. In his arms she felt ordinary in the most extraordinary way. A woman loved not for her name, but for her laugh, her thoughts, her soul. She laughed at his jokes, admired his ambition, and felt protected in his arms. She let her guard down in ways she never had before, believing she'd finally found someone who saw her, not her lineage. When Ivy discovered she was pregnant, Aiden appeared thrilled, vowing to be a devoted provider and handsome father. His salary wasn't impressive, but he had big dreams, constantly talking about scaling the corporate ladder and making it big. He painted pictures of future vacations, a bigger house, private schools, promises wrapped in charm, but built on nothing solid. Ivy admired his determination and never once considered revealing her true wealth. She wanted their relationship to be rooted in something real. But after they got married, the illusion began to crack slowly. At first, then, all at once, Aiden started making sarcastic remarks about Ivy not bringing in enough income. He insisted she take on extra shifts at the bookstore and griped endlessly about rent and mounting baby-related expenses. Meanwhile, he splurged on tailored suits, lavish dinners with coworkers, and pricey weekend getaways disguised as networking trips. Each receipt felt like a silent betrayal, like a slap to the sacrifices she was quietly making. Ivy began to notice the way he avoided her gaze when she mentioned doctor appointments, how he flinched when she brought up the baby's needs. Every time he dismissed her concerns, a little part of her hope chipped away, replaced with silent dread she didn't dare voice. The receipts told stories he never explained. Yet he criticized Ivy for every minor expense, from prenatal supplements to the occasional pastry at her favorite cafe. Worse, he began withdrawing not just emotionally but physically, coming home late, avoiding eye contact, brushing off her concerns with patronizing comments. Tension in their cramped one-bedroom apartment thickened as her pregnancy progressed. Ivy did her best to maintain peace. She made promises to herself and to him that she would support his ambitions, no matter what. She held her belly some nights in the dark, whispering to her unborn child that everything would be okay, even when she wasn't sure she believed it herself. There were moments she cried in the bathroom quietly, so he wouldn't hear, so no one would know just how afraid she was becoming. Meanwhile, she silently endured mourning, sickness, crushing fatigue, and a growing fear for what the future held. She convinced herself that everything would change once the baby arrived, that love would pull them through. She wanted to believe in him, but the man she once admired had begun to morph into a stranger with each passing day. But deep down, Ivy knew Aiden was turning into someone. He had a magnetic presence, effortlessly drawing people in. He spoke with smooth assurance, a man who knew how to sell not just cars, but illusions. When Tessa walked into the dealership to buy a used car, something she could have easily paid for in full, she chose instead to keep her financial reality hidden. Connor was immediately captivated by her quiet beauty. To him, she was unlike anyone else, modest, mysterious, and seemingly without entitlement. It intrigued him. They began dating, and within 6 months, were swept into a whirlwind romance that ended in a quick courthouse wedding. For a while, Tessa felt like she was living a dream. She truly believed Connor loved her for who she was, not for what she owned or what she might one day inherit. She laughed at his jokes, admired his drive, and felt safe in his arms. She let her guard down in ways she never had before, convinced she had finally found someone who saw her, not her lineage. For the first time, she didn't have to pretend. His touch felt genuine, his smile warm, and in those early days, she'd look at him and wondered if fate had finally handed her something real. She memorized the way he said her name, the way he reached for her hand like it was second nature. In her heart, she dared to believe in forever. When Tessa found out she was pregnant, Connor appeared thrilled, promising to be a devoted provider and hands-on father. His salary wasn't remarkable, but he dreamed big, constantly talking about climbing the corporate ladder and achieving major success. He painted vivid pictures of tropical vacations, a bigger house, private schools, promises wrapped in charm but built on nothing concrete. Tessa admired his ambition and never once considered revealing her true wealth. She wanted their relationship to be grounded in something authentic. But after they got married, the illusion began to crack, first slowly, then all at once. Connor started making sarcastic comments about Tessa not contributing enough financially. He insisted she take on extra shifts at the bookstore and complained constantly about rent and the rising costs of baby preparations. At the same time, he splurged on tailored suits, extravagant dinners with coworkers, and expensive weekend getaways masked as networking opportunities. The receipts told stories he never explained, yet he nitpicked Tessa for every small expense, from prenatal vitamins to the occasional treat at her favorite cafe. Every criticism landed like a blow to her spirit, each one chipping away at the image of the man she thought she married. She kept the receipts not because she wanted proof, but because she needed to convince herself she wasn't imagining the imbalance. Worse, he began to withdraw, not just emotionally, but physically. He came home late, avoided eye contact, and brushed off her concerns with condescending remarks. Tension thickened in their cramped one-bedroom apartment as her pregnancy progressed. Tessa did her best to keep the peace. She made promises to herself and to him that she would support his dreams no matter what. Some nights, she'd sit alone in the bathroom with her knees tucked under her chin, trying to breathe through the ache. She didn't want to make noise, didn't want him to hear her crying. She was already carrying their child. She didn't want to carry their disappointment too. Meanwhile, she silently endured morning sickness, exhausting fatigue, and a growing fear of what the future held. She told herself things would get better once the baby arrived, that love would carry them through. She wanted to believe in him. But the man she once admired was beginning to morph into a stranger more and more with each passing day. And deep down, Tessa knew Connor was becoming someone else. She didn't recognize him anymore. The breaking point came on a stormy night during her 6th month of pregnancy. Rain pounded against the windows, lightning slashed the sky, and thunder rattled the walls of their tiny apartment. Connor stumbled in late from what he called a business dinner, reeking of alcohol and, worse, perfume. Tessa's heart sank as the scent of another woman clung to his clothes. His tie was crooked, and his normally neat hair was disheveled. "What happened to you?" Tessa asked, one hand instinctively resting on her swollen belly. She stepped toward him, gently reaching out to help with his soaked jacket. "Don't touch me," Connor snapped, yanking his arm away. "You think you're so special just because you're pregnant? Like I owe you something now?" "Connor, I don't understand," she said, eyes welling up with tears. "You said you were meeting a client. You smell like—" "Don't start, Tessa," he slurred, jabbing a finger at her. "I'm not in the mood for your whining. Do you have any idea how humiliating it is to be married to someone who can barely hold a basic job? Do you know how that makes me look to my coworkers?" She drew a shaky breath. "Connor, we're partners. I'm trying my best. We're having a baby, remember? I'm trying to save money. I'm trying to support you." "Save money?" He barked out a bitter, humorless laugh, swaying slightly. "What money? And now we've got a baby on the way. Great, just one more mouth to feed." Tessa had never seen him like this, so bitter, so full of resentment. His words hit like a blow to the chest. "Connor," she whispered, tears streaming down her face, "what are you saying? You wanted this baby. You told me you were happy." "Yeah, well, maybe I changed my mind," he scoffed. "What have you done for me lately, huh? I'm stuck in this shoebox apartment, footing all the bills, and you've never brought anything real to the table." "That's not fair," she said, summoning a flicker of courage she didn't know she had. "I've never asked for a luxurious life. I've paid my share of the bills. I've paid rent. Suddenly, Connor stormed across the room. He grabbed her suitcase from the corner, yanked open the closet, and began stuffing her clothes into it. Tessa stood frozen, horror and confusion churning inside her. "Connor, what are you doing?" "I'm done," he said coldly. "Get out of my life. I can't even stand to look at your face anymore." "Please," she begged, her voice cracking. "I'm pregnant. We need to talk." He zipped the suitcase shut and slammed it onto the floor with a heavy thud, then pointed at the door. "Take your stuff and leave. I've got enough problems. I don't need some whining, hormonal pregnant woman making it worse." Tessa's head spun. It felt like she was trapped in a nightmare she couldn't wake up from. Orba said. She made one last attempt to reason with him, but he wouldn't listen. Instead, he shoved her roughly toward the front door, ignoring her obvious distress. Her breath caught in her throat, disbelief tightening her chest as she tried to plead one more time, but his eyes were cold, empty. There was no flicker of love left, no hesitation in his movements, only a chilling indifference that sliced deeper than rage ever could. His rejection wasn't loud, it was surgical. In a desperate bid to protect herself and her unborn child, Tessa wrapped her arms around her belly as she stumbled out of the apartment into the relentless downpour. Her suitcase came flying after her, landing hard on the wet pavement. The zipper split slightly, scattering a tiny pair of baby booties and a half-read parenting book into the rain. The door slammed shut behind her with a violence that rivaled the storm rumbling across the Denver sky. Drenched from head to toe, Tessa stood trembling on the stoop, rain mingling with the tears streaming down her face. It was the middle of the night. She was betrayed, abandoned, terrified. She had once imagined this moment would come with pain, but not like this. Not soaking wet, shivering, clutching fragments of her unborn child's future in her arms, while the man she loved shut her out without a second glance. Lightning cracked across the clouds, illuminating the empty street in erratic flashes. The whole scene felt surreal, like she was watching someone else's tragedy unfold from the outside. She had nowhere to go. No one, nothing. Except the life she had tried so hard to leave behind in pursuit of normalcy. Thunder growled above her as she grabbed the suitcase with one hand, the other pressed protectively over her belly. Grief and rage churned within her, but beneath them something new began to rise. Not just survival, fire. A vow ignited in her chest, a silent promise. This would not be the end of her story. She had tried to be the quiet, supportive wife, the unassuming woman. And Connor had thrown all of that in her face. If only he knew who she really was. If only he understood the power she held, the power she could summon with a single phone call. He thought she was weak. But weakness didn't come from kindness. It came from cruelty. And his cruelty had just cost him everything. And in that storm, something broke open, something primal. Her tears dried not from comfort, but from defiance. She wasn't just walking away. She was walking toward something else entirely. Reckoning. But right now, Tessa wasn't thinking about revenge. She just needed to survive the night. Turning her back on the apartment that once held her dreams, she stepped into the storm. Each raindrop hit her like a final punctuation mark. Each step forward tore her further from the woman she had once been, a soft woman, now hardening in real time. One day, Connor would regret everything. Of that, she was sure. And when that day came, she'd be ready, holding the ace he never even knew existed. After Connor cast her out, Tessa found temporary shelter at a small roadside motel on the outskirts of Denver. She paid for the room in cash, grateful she had tucked away a modest emergency fund. Her pregnancy had started to show, but her youthful features often caused strangers to question whether she was really about to become a mother. She avoided eye contact with the receptionist. She didn't want pity. She didn't need it. In the silence of the motel room, the reality of her situation settled in with suffocating clarity. She was alone, pregnant, heartbroken, but she wasn't broke, and she wasn't powerless. Yet in that silence, grief buzzed in her ears like static, loud, oppressive. Her body ached with exhaustion, but her heart ached worse. She had loved Connor. She had built dreams on sand, believing they could weather storms. Now she was surrounded not by comfort or companionship, but peeling wallpaper and the hum of a vending machine outside. Early the next morning, she reached for a phone number she had rarely used, one reserved for moments exactly like this. The The first call went to voicemail, but just minutes later, her phone buzzed with a return call. A distinguished, slightly frail voice answered. "Tessa, my dear? Is that you?" It was the voice of Martin Ellsworth, an older gentleman who had served as her mother's trusted attorney and confidant for decades, one of the very few people who knew Tessa's true background. "Mr. Ellsworth," she said, her voice trembling, "I need your help." He didn't ask questions. He just came. He arrived at the motel within the hour, his silver hair catching the early sunlight, dressed in a perfectly tailored navy suit despite the morning chill. Martin gave Tessa a solemn once-over, concern etched deeply into the lines of his weathered face. "My dear," he said quietly, "I'd heard whispers that you married in secret. I hoped it brought you happiness, but I see now that it didn't." Tessa shook her head, fresh tears threatening to fall. "He threw me out, Mr. Ellsworth," she said, her voice breaking. He doesn't even know who I really am. I never told him about my family, about the inheritance." Martin listened quietly, nodding as he took in every word. He had known Tessa since she was a little girl, and had honored Lillian's wishes to keep Tessa's legacy hidden until she was truly ready to carry it. His heart broke as he looked at her. No longer the carefree girl he remembered, but a woman tempered by betrayal and hardened by survival. He reached out, placing a gentle hand over hers, a rare gesture of comfort from a man known for legal precision rather than emotional warmth. "I'm so sorry," he said softly, his voice thick with empathy. "What do you want to do now?" Tessa hesitated. She was exhausted. Her eyes were swollen from crying, her body heavy with stress, but she had to think about her baby. "I need somewhere to stay," she said at last. I think I'm finally ready to step into the life my mother left behind. No more hiding." Martin gave a solemn nod. "It's your birthright," he said. "Your mother wanted you to have freedom to choose your own path. She never wanted wealth to define you, nor did she want you trapped under the shadow of legacy." He paused, watching her closely. "But now, you've seen the world's cruelty on your own. Maybe it's time to use what's always been yours." "What's yours?" Tessa swallowed hard, the words hitting deep. For so long she had longed for a quiet life, something real, far from the extravagance her father symbolized. But now reality had pushed her to a crossroads. "Yes," she said, her voice steady. "I'm ready." Within hours, Martin had discreetly arranged for her to be moved into a penthouse in downtown Denver. The property had once belonged to her mother but had remained untouched for years. It sat high above the city in a luxury high-rise, complete with floor-to-ceiling windows, polished marble floors, and sleek modern furnishings. It was extravagant, far more than anything Tessa had known in her modest apartment with Connor. As she stepped into the spacious living room, her eyes swept across the Denver skyline, and her breath caught. "It's too much," she whispered. Martin stepped beside her, his voice gentle. "You own this place, Tessa. You can make it as simple or as grand as you like, but most importantly, it's safe, and you deserve that now, especially with the baby on the way." His words settled into her chest like a balm. Safe. The word felt foreign and warm all at once. She hadn't felt safe in months, maybe years. Not truly. Not in the way that allowed her to exhale without fear. In this place, she could finally breathe. Yet a part of her resisted the comfort. The silence was too quiet, too distant from the world she had fought to survive in. She didn't feel like she belonged here, among marble countertops and city views. She felt like a guest in her own life. Her hand moved instinctively to her belly. Tears filled her eyes, not from sorrow this time, but from sheer, overwhelming relief. She had a roof over her head. A refuge, a place where she and her unborn child would be protected. "Thank you, Mr. Ellsworth," she murmured softly. Martin handed her a set of keys. "I've already had the fridge stocked. I can arrange for a housekeeper if you'd like. And remember, the Whitaker estate is extensive. There are funds we can activate whenever you're ready." Tessa nodded, remembering her mother's words. Money can fix practical things, but never what's broken in your heart. And right now, her heart was shattered, but her immediate needs, food, shelter, safety, were covered. That was enough for now. Over the next few days, Tessa worked to acclimate to her new surroundings. She began turning one of the smaller rooms into a nursery, choosing soft, neutral colors, since she didn't yet know if she was expecting a boy or a girl. Each brushstroke on the wall felt like a quiet act of healing. She wasn't just painting a room, she was creating space for a future. Piece by piece, she felt oddly out of place, shopping at upscale boutiques like Little Willow and high-end baby stores in Cherry Creek, places where she could buy anything she wanted. But that deep-rooted humility her mother had instilled in her never left. Once, while standing in a baby aisle, overwhelmed by rows of tiny onesies and designer cribs, she nearly broke down in tears. The memory of Connor's betrayal still clung to her like a shadow. And beneath it all, a strange guilt flickered. Was it right to raise a child in a world so different from what she had dreamed? Was she choosing safety or hiding behind it? Then one morning, Tessa received an unexpected visitor. When she opened the penthouse door, a woman stood there in a tailored blazer, notepad in hand, with a photographer beside her. "Tessa Blake?" the woman asked, offering a professional smile. "Or should I say, Tessa Whitaker? I'm sorry to show up unannounced, but we've been trying to reach you regarding your father's latest corporate acquisition." It was Mallory Quinn, a reporter from the Denver Financial Tribune, and a former acquaintance of her father, Everett Whitaker. Clearly, word had spread. Tessa was back in the Whitaker circle. "We've also heard rumors that you might be stepping into a leadership role within the Whitaker business empire. Any truth to that?" Tessa's stomach tightened. She had zero interest in speaking to the press. "I'm not giving interviews," she replied firmly but politely. And with that, she closed the door, ignoring the barrage of follow-up questions. The moment the door clicked shut, a wave of unease rolled through her. Her hand lingered on the doorknob, trembling slightly. Being recognized, not as Tessa Blake, but as Tessa Whitaker, felt like stepping into someone else's life. One she had run from, and now couldn't avoid. It felt like slipping into a skin she'd shed long ago, only to find it waiting in the shadows. Her father's business dealings had never been her concern, or so she had always believed. But just hearing his name linked to her life stirred a discomfort she couldn't explain. The idea of seeing him again, of being pulled back into that world, made her pulse quicken. Still, a quiet voice inside her whispered, this wasn't something she could avoid forever. That evening, Tessa decided to face it, head on. Seated in the plush living room of the penthouse, she cradled a warm mug of decaf tea, mindful of the baby growing inside her. "What about my father?" she asked softly. Martin sighed, setting his teacup down carefully. "I've kept him informed of your well-being, with your mother's permission. Since her passing, he's been aware that you've taken up residence here at the penthouse. Whether he chooses to reach out, that I cannot predict." Tessa closed her eyes, the image of the man she once called Dad surfacing like an old faded photograph. He'd made rare appearances during her childhood, showing up on birthdays with expensive gifts and empty compliments, only to vanish again just as quickly. Those fleeting visits left more confusion than comfort. Every time he appeared, hope bloomed inside her, only to wither days later when the silence returned. That pattern carved deep wounds. She had never believed he truly cared. It had always felt like a performance. Eventually, Lillian had cut ties completely, determined to raise Tessa without his influence. And now, fate might be dragging them back into the same orbit. In the weeks that followed, Tessa began receiving calls from unknown numbers, most of which she declined. Then came the letters, formal invitations to Whitaker family events she never even knew existed. The Denver social scene began to buzz with whispers. The long-estranged daughter of Everett Whitaker, pregnant and possibly poised to step into a major role within the family dynasty. But Tessa wasn't interested in galas, headlines, or legacy. Her focus was her unborn child, an emotional peace. Still, thoughts of Connor crept in late at night like shadows slipping under the door. He had discarded her, called her worthless. He didn't know what she had sacrificed for him, how she had buried her identity to protect his pride, how she had hidden her wealth so he wouldn't feel small. And now, here she was, living in a penthouse, surrounded by resources he couldn't even fathom. If only he knew. But she wasn't interested in revenge. Not yet. Her child came first. Still, the memory of his cruelty whispered in her bones, a scar not yet faded. Sometimes she would catch herself thinking of his voice, not out of longing but out of disbelief. How easily he erased her. Her days were now filled with parenting books, gentle prenatal yoga, and quiet conversations with Martin about what the future might look like. One afternoon, as rain tapped gently against the windows, Martin cleared his throat. "Tessa," he said carefully, "there's one more matter we should address. Your mother's will. Now that you're residing in one of her properties, it's time to formally go over the next steps." Tessa nodded slowly, her heart fluttering. "Yes, of course." Martin leaned forward. "Before she passed, your mother set up a trust to be activated upon the birth of your first child. The baby will inherit a substantial portion of the Whitaker estate, enough to provide security for generations." He paused, then added, "There's also a provision. You are to be the child's guardian and trustee until they come of age." "Your father cannot contest it," Martin said firmly, "not without facing significant legal consequences." Tessa felt a tightening in her chest. The weight of it, the finality, the protection. It was almost too much to process. She had never fully grasped the extent of her mother's foresight. "So, it's all locked in?" she asked softly. Martin gave her a reassuring smile. "Yes, no one can take this from you, or from your child. You're both protected." Protected. The word didn't just echo in her mind, it grounded her. It wrapped itself around the frayed edges of everything she had endured. She had power now, a safety net. She was no longer a woman surviving on hope and broken promises. The frightened, desperate woman who once begged Connor not to leave was gone. In her place stood a mother, steady and resolved, fiercely devoted to defending her child and herself. She vowed that Connor would never make her feel small again. She wasn't the poor, helpless wife he thought she was. She never had been. He just never looked close enough to see the strength simmering beneath her silence. As weeks turned into months, Tessa became more grounded in her new life. She prepared for the baby's arrival with quiet determination, slowly transforming the penthouse into a space filled with comfort and warmth. Soft classical music often played in the background, blending with the hum of baby monitors and the gentle crinkle of delivery boxes labeled with phrases like organic cotton, non-toxic, and premium care. Sometimes Tessa found herself wondering about Connor. Maybe he was still stuck in that same cramped apartment, driving that same worn-out car, still blaming her for everything. Or maybe he had already moved on, to someone flashier, someone he thought had money. The irony burned. He had no idea that the woman he had thrown away was worth more than he could imagine, and even less idea that the child he abandoned would one day inherit a fortune beyond his wildest dreams. Most nights, Tessa tried to push away any thoughts of revenge. She had her baby to think about. Still, in the stillness of night, when the city quieted and shadows crept into the corners of her mind, she sometimes imagined it. Connor returning one day, begging for forgiveness, and her standing tall, unmoved. No tears, no hesitation, just truth. "Maybe I won't be so quick to give it," she would think. As her 7th month of pregnancy approached, Tessa began experiencing the usual discomfort: swollen feet, back pain, restless nights. But alongside the physical strain came something else: purpose, possibility. She began quietly brainstorming philanthropic projects, remembering her mother's belief that wealth should serve others. One idea in particular took root: a library and resource center for young mothers. It blended her lifelong love of books with a newfound empathy for women navigating pregnancy and parenthood alone. It felt right, like a continuation of something her mother had begun, and she was now ready to carry forward. Martin supported the idea, but offered gentle caution. "You have time," he reminded her. "Focus on your health first. The rest will fall into place." Then, one crisp morning, Tessa was pulled from a restless sleep by the buzz of the intercom. It was the front desk. An unexpected visitor. Her heart leapt into her throat. Was it Connor? Or worse, her father? She shuffled to the monitor, nerves on edge. Pressed the button. "Yes?" she asked cautiously. "It's Natalie Green, Miss Blake," the doorman said politely. "She says she's an old friend." Tessa's face lit up. Natalie Green, of course. One of the very few people who knew scattered pieces of Tessa's complicated past. They had spent a few summers together during high school, volunteering at a neighborhood literacy center. Natalie also knew the truth about Tessa's identity, but she had never once betrayed her trust. "Send her up, please." Moments later, Natalie stepped into the penthouse, her eyes wide with amazement. "Whoa, Tessa," she breathed, taking in the sleek, luxurious space. You weren't kidding about the family money. Tessa laughed, waddling over to offer a careful hug. Trust me, she said. If it weren't for, well, everything, I might still be in that shoebox apartment. She led Natalie into the living room. The two of them settled onto a soft couch as Natalie placed a small bag of pastries on the coffee table. Figured you might be craving something sweet, she said with a grin. Tessa smiled, pouring them each a cup of tea. Better, she admitted, resting her hands on her growing belly. At least settled. But definitely not over Connor. Natalie's smile faded. She had been furious when she first heard what Connor had done. Have you heard from him at all? Natalie asked gently. Not a word, Tessa replied, trying to hide the sting that still came with saying it out loud. In truth, part of her wanted Connor to call, to grovel, to say he regretted everything. Another part of her feared it would reopen wounds she was still trying to heal. Natalie reached across and placed a comforting hand on Tessa's arm. You deserve so much better. And just so you know, if you need help with anything, baby stuff, errands, or just someone to talk to, I'm here. Touched, Tessa smiled through misty eyes. Thank you. Actually, there is something. She took a breath. I've been thinking about starting a small foundation, a resource center for young mothers, a place they can go for support, prenatal care, counseling, job guidance. I'd really love your input. Natalie's eyes lit up. That's an amazing idea. I'm in. Let's start putting together a plan. After Natalie left, Tessa felt a renewed sense of purpose. For the first time in weeks, she was looking forward to something beyond the rubble of her failed marriage. Her next prenatal appointment was already scheduled for the following week, and she decided to use the outing as a chance to scout locations for the center. But the next day brought an unexpected shock. There was a knock at her penthouse door, and behind it stood a face she hadn't seen in years. Everett Whitaker, her father. Tessa froze, heart thudding in her chest. He stood tall, rigid, with silver-streaked hair and the confident gaze of a man used to running boardrooms. His tailored suit likely cost thousands, and a gold watch gleamed beneath the foyer light. Hello, Tessa, he said, voice calm and measured. May I come in? She hesitated, then stepped aside. Of course. Everett entered the penthouse, his eyes quietly scanning the room with a businesslike calm. I see you've made yourself at home. I have, Tessa replied, arms folded across her chest. Mr. Ellsworth helped me get settled. Martin's a good man, Everett said as he moved toward the window. His eyes flicked toward her belly, and for the first time, a faint softness appeared on his otherwise stern face. You're carrying my grandchild. Tessa's hand moved instinctively to her stomach. A strange mixture of protectiveness and uncertainty rose within her. Yes, I am. Everett's shoulders dropped ever so slightly as he exhaled deeply. I know I've never been the father you needed, he said slowly. Your mother and we had our differences. But I want you to know, whatever you need, I'm here. Tessa looked at him, emotions swirling behind her eyes. And what exactly do you think I need from you, father? He cleared his throat. Financial support, for one. Connections, media protection. I know you probably resent me, Everett said quietly, but I don't want you to go through this alone. Tessa's first instinct was to shut the door on the offer. She didn't need his help, especially not when it came to her inheritance. She was more than capable of standing on her own, but Martin's words echoed in her mind. How Lillian had always hoped that one day, maybe, there could be some reconciliation. And she couldn't ignore the truth. Being under the Whitaker name again could protect her child if Connor ever came back, especially if he ever tried to assert rights he hadn't earned. I appreciate the offer, she finally said. But let's be clear, I'm not going to be your puppet. If you want to be involved in this child's life, it will be on my terms, mine and the baby's. Everett nodded slowly. I understand. A flicker of relief passed across his face. They spoke for nearly an hour about her health, her due date, the rumors already swirling in the press. Everett offered to connect her with the best doctors to enhance her security if needed. And while Tessa remained cautious, she could see the potential value in aligning with her father, for her child's sake, if nothing else. In the weeks that followed, Everett returned a few more times. He even accompanied her on a visit to a high-end maternity boutique, quietly covering the cost of nearly everything, despite her half-hearted protests. It felt surreal. Walking beside the man she had spent years avoiding, now bonding over baby onesies and designer swaddles. Part of her softened. She caught glimpses of something real in his eyes, genuine pride at the thought of becoming a grandfather. But still, Tessa kept her emotional walls firmly in place. She couldn't forget the man who had missed every birthday, every holiday, who had barely called. Still, she allowed herself the faintest hope. Maybe people could change, or at least try. Meanwhile, Connor remained conspicuously absent. She heard from mutual acquaintances that he was dating someone new, bragging about how he'd finally gotten rid of his dead weight. The words stung, but they also sharpened her resolve. Connor belonged to the past, and if he ever dared to come crawling back, he'd find a very different woman waiting. One who didn't need him anymore. In the midst of that emotional storm, Tessa made a bold decision. She agreed to become more involved with Whitaker Industries, at least on a trial basis. Everett arranged a quiet, private meeting with a select group of board members from Whitaker Global Holdings. Tessa wanted to understand what her child would someday inherit, how the business operated, and what philanthropic potential it held. The meeting was tense at first. Older board members gave her long, skeptical looks. Some murmured under their breath about her pregnancy. But Everett stood by her side and formally introduced her as his daughter. He made it clear that Tessa would have a voice, particularly when it came to matters of influence involving charitable work. Tessa earned cautious respect when she spoke up, asking sharp, thoughtful questions about corporate ethics, philanthropic distribution, and employee welfare. She hadn't come to impress anyone, but she did. At the end of the meeting, an older board member approached her, James Caldwell. "You speak with the same conviction your mother had," he said kindly. "We all admired Lillian. She was the soul of this company's conscience." He paused. "It's good to have you here." Tessa's eyes stung. "Thank you," she managed to say. "I only hope I can live up to her legacy." She walked out of that boardroom with a renewed sense of purpose. Her child would have a strong, secure future, and Tessa would ensure that Whitaker Global didn't just profit, but gave back. She was determined to use the company's influence to invest in education, affordable housing, and access to health care, causes her mother would have poured her heart into. Still, in the quiet corners of the penthouse, Tessa wrestled with the lingering ache that Connor had left behind. She remembered how he mocked her, how he shoved her into the cold without hesitation. Each day she grew stronger, but the bruise he left on her spirit hadn't completely faded. Perhaps it never would. She did her best to live in the present. Her life had changed. She was surrounded by resources, by family, however complicated, and most importantly, by hope for her child's future. There were more blessings than she could count. Yet a single question simmered in the back of her mind. Would Connor ever come looking for her? And if he did, would it be for forgiveness or for fortune? The thought haunted her dreams. Again and again she saw the moment he forced her into the storm. Again and again she felt that same chill down to her soul, but she swore, if he ever came back, he wouldn't find the same naive woman waiting. A storm was forming on the horizon. Tessa could feel it, and this time she was ready to face it head-on. Armed with knowledge, with power, with an iron will. Her vulnerability had become her weapon, sharper than resentment. It had forged purpose. The next chapter of her life wouldn't be a tragedy. It would be a story of strength, of redemption, and maybe even revenge. Weeks passed, then months. Peace returned, but it was the quiet before a different kind of storm, one she welcomed, and finally, the day arrived. Tessa went into labor late one snowy Denver evening. Frost clung to the penthouse windows like lace. She had just finalized the last details of the Mother's Resource Center she planned to launch, when a sharp, deep pain surged through her abdomen. A contraction. The first powerful sign that her life was about to change forever. Not just hers, but the legacy she was about to bring into the world. Everett Whitaker had insisted on hiring a private car and a full security team to ensure she reached the hospital safely. Natalie Green, now her unofficial doula and steadfast support, rushed to Tessa's side the moment she got the call. Martin Ellsworth was there too, ensuring every document and medical clearance was flawlessly handled. Every form bore the weight of a name that now symbolized protection, legacy, and survival. For a brief second, Tessa felt a pang of sadness. No husband at her side, no hand to squeeze, but she pushed the thought away. She had already mourned that absence. She didn't need it now. Connor's absence wouldn't overshadow this miracle. The vehicle that transported her wasn't an ambulance. Not exactly. It was a luxury SUV, outfitted with medical gear, cruising through Denver's quiet streets en route to a premier maternity hospital. Tessa focused on her breathing. Her fear mingled with excitement. Tears welled in her eyes, not from pain, but from the enormity of it all. She had never felt so vulnerable, or so powerful. She was bringing new life into the world. Labor was long, grueling. Nearly 12 hours passed. Everett paced the hospital hallway like a restless lion, refusing to leave, despite polite suggestions from staff. It was the first time Tessa had seen him shaken, not by stocks or takeovers, but by the delicate edge of life. Natalie remained at Tessa's bedside, holding her hand, brushing damp hair from her forehead, whispering encouragements. "You're almost there. You're stronger than you think." And Tessa believed her. Martin hovered nearby, calm, unwavering, a lighthouse in a storm. Every contraction felt like a wave crashing through her. Her body trembled with exhaustion, her knuckles white from gripping the rails of the hospital bed. Between pushes, she closed her eyes and whispered silent prayers, not just for strength, but for the baby to arrive safely into this chaotic world. And then, with one final, agonizing push, a piercing cry filled the room. "It's a boy," the doctor announced. Tessa's head dropped back onto the pillow, tears flowing freely. She heard her newborn's tiny wails as the nurse gently placed him in her arms. His tiny face scrunched red from the effort of his first breaths. He weighed just 6 pounds, 7 ounces, small but perfect. In that moment, the rest of the world vanished. All that mattered was the fragile, precious life in her arms. She traced his tiny features with trembling fingers. His button nose, the soft curve of his cheeks, every detail carved a permanent place into her soul. It didn't matter what storms she'd faced to get here. This child, this miracle, was worth it all. The surge of love she felt was immediate and overwhelming, something she had never known. She pressed a gentle kiss to his forehead. Tears of joy spilled onto his soft cheek. Outside, the sun began to rise over the Denver skyline, casting streaks of gold and pink across the morning sky. The next few hours passed in a blur. Nurses, doctors, paperwork. Eventually, Everett entered the room, moving with care. His usually stoic face softened by something unfamiliar, gentleness. "He's beautiful," he murmured, reaching out with a trembling hand to stroke the baby's tiny head. Tessa gave him a weary smile, her face flushed and damp with sweat. "He needs a name," she said, her voice raspy from exhaustion. She had considered naming him after her mother, or something that symbolized new beginnings. Natalie had suggested, "What about James? After your mom's dear friend, James Caldwell." Tessa paused, thoughtfully considering it, then shook her head gently. "James is lovely, but it doesn't feel quite right." Martin had another idea. "Your mother always loved the name Theodore," he offered quietly. "She used to say it meant gift of God." Tessa's eyes widened as the name clicked deep in her heart. She remembered now. "Theodore," she whispered, then smiled. "Teddy." She looked down at her son, cradled gently in her arms. "Yes, Theodore Whitaker, Blake." Everett nodded, seemingly satisfied with the name, even if the inclusion of Blake, Connor's surname, carried complicated weight. Tessa explained gently, "Blake was part of me when Teddy was conceived. I want him to know where he came from. Both sides." It was a bittersweet decision, but she knew it was the right one. She wouldn't pretend the past didn't exist, no matter how painful. Teddy had been born from heartbreak, but he was also her hope, her beginning. Tessa spent the next week in a private suite at the hospital, bonding with her newborn son. Each night, she lay awake, listening to the soft rhythm of his breathing, marveling at the miracle they shared. Every sigh, every tiny stretch of his fingers filled the hollow places that grief had carved inside her. She studied his features endlessly, searching for traces of herself, of the man who had hurt her. And yet all she saw was purity, untouched by the weight of the past. News outlets buzzed with speculation about Everett Whitaker's new heir, but tight security kept the media at a safe distance. Tessa refused all interview requests. She was determined to protect her son's privacy. Finally, the day arrived to bring Teddy home. She wrapped him in a soft, cream-colored blanket and carried him into the penthouse, now transformed, outfitted with every modern baby gadget imaginable. A rotation of nurses and a night nanny had been arranged, courtesy of Everett's concern and deep pockets. Tessa was grateful and overwhelmed. There were moments she sat silently by the window, Teddy in her arms, and wondered how her life had pivoted so sharply, from being cast out in the rain to residing in luxury. Yet the ache of that turning point still echoed quietly in her chest. She was healing, yes, but healing wasn't linear. Some nights, the weight of everything she'd endured pressed heavy on her lungs, and she would whisper promises into Teddy's ear just to hear her own voice say them out loud. She appreciated the help, but sometimes longed for the simplicity of her old life. Before the money, before the media, before everything had been filtered through the lens of legacy and wealth. Late one evening, as Teddy slept peacefully in his bassinet and the Denver skyline glittered through the windows, the intercom buzzed. Tessa frowned. She glanced at the clock, nearly 11 p.m. Who could possibly be visiting now? She pressed the button. Yes. Miss Blake, came the voice from the front desk. There's a gentleman downstairs. He says he knows you. His name is Connor Blake. Tessa's heart slammed against her ribs. Connor. After months of silence, he was here. Her mind spun with questions. Was he here to apologize? To beg for forgiveness? Or had he heard whispers of her wealth, the baby, the life she now lived? She drew in a slow, steadying breath. Send him away, she said, her voice cold, flat, final. A part of her did want to see him, wanted him to see what she had built without him. But the other part, the mother, wanted no chaos near her son. Not now. Not ever. Her son was asleep upstairs, and Tessa refused to allow drama into his sanctuary. There was a pause. He's making a bit of a scene, the security officer said carefully. Mr. Blake says he won't leave unless he speaks to you. Tessa closed her eyes. She saw it again, that stormy night, the door slamming behind her, the suitcase hitting the pavement, the cold air slicing into her skin. She remembered the fear, the betrayal, then the anger. And with it, a strange sense of calm. She was no longer the broken woman he had thrown away. Fine, she said. Send him to the lobby lounge. I'll come down. Adrenaline surged through her veins as she gave the night nanny instructions to keep an eye on Teddy. She slipped into a navy wool coat, the collar trimmed in soft fur, and stepped into the private elevator. On the way down, she reminded herself, you are in control now. If Connor tried anything, building security had already been alerted. The elevator doors opened to the plush, dimly lit lounge. She spotted him instantly. He was pacing near the marble fireplace, wearing a wrinkled suit, looking nothing like the man who once strutted with confidence. His hair was longer now, unkempt. His eyes were hollow, restless. When he saw her, he stopped mid-step. Tessa, he breathed. You look different. She crossed the room slowly, her heels tapping against the polished stone floor. What do you want, Connor? He ran a shaky hand through his hair. Can we talk somewhere more private? She didn't flinch, her arms folded, her voice calm. This is private enough. Say what you came to say. His eyes flicked around, taking in the elegant surroundings. The fireplace, the quiet luxury, the distant doorman, a small, blinking security camera in the corner. Look, I've been hearing things, Connor said, shifting uncomfortably. Okay, I heard you came into some money, and I heard you had the baby. The bluntness of his words stung, but Tessa didn't flinch. Yes, she said evenly. I had the baby, a boy. Not that you bothered to ask or show up until now. Connor winced. I messed up, Tessa. I was in a bad place. Work was falling apart. I was under pressure. I acted like a jerk. I know that. I want to make it right. She arched a brow, her arms still crossed. Why now? Her voice was calm, controlled, but inside her pulse pounded. You threw me out during a snowstorm when I was 6 months pregnant, she reminded him. I begged you to stay calm, to talk, and you shoved me out. You called me worthless. And now what? You expect me to believe you've changed? He looked genuinely remorseful, but his eyes kept wandering around the lounge, lingering on the marble finishes, the curated furniture, the quiet luxury. Things were chaotic back then, he said. I didn't know what I was doing, but I see now how wrong I was. I'm ready to be a father to our child. Tessa's heart didn't leap with hope, it thundered with fury. You don't even know your son's name. Connor hesitated. No, I don't. You're right, but that's why I'm here. I want to try. There was a time, long ago, when those words might have shattered her resolve, might have cracked her wide open with hope. But now, she saw them clearly. They were hollow. She remembered the nights he came home reeking of alcohol, the way he mocked her swollen belly, the way he made her feel invisible. Small. Was this man really capable of change, or had he only shown up because he'd heard whispers about the penthouse? The Whitaker fortune? "It's too late, Connor," she said softly, but with absolute finality. "You abandoned me, and your child. We don't need you." His face twisted in desperation. "Please, Tessa, let me see my son, just once. I have a right." Her eyes narrowed, sharp as glass. "Don't talk to me about rights. You forfeited those the night you shoved me out into the cold." She stepped closer. Her voice was quiet, deadly sharp. "If you want to pursue this legally, be my guest. But you'll learn quickly that my resources are far more extensive than you could ever comprehend." Connor's face went pale. He stepped back, uncertain. What are you saying?" Tessa's voice dropped, controlled, lethal. "I'm saying you have no idea who you're dealing with." She stepped even closer. "I'm a Whitaker. My son is a Whitaker heir. If you try anything, I will bury you in court filings, lawsuits, and restraining orders. You won't even get within a city block of us." He swallowed, the bravado draining from his eyes. I thought maybe we could talk. Try again. Be a family." Tessa almost laughed. "Family?" Her mind flooded with images. The silence, the humiliation, the ache of nights spent crying alone, the bruise he left on her soul. "You're too late," she said, calm and cold. "I have a family now. My son, my friend Natalie, my father, and the legacy I'm building." She paused. Her voice remained steady, but her heart pounded like war drums. "You have no place in it." Across the lounge, the doorman cleared his throat quietly, sensing the rising tension. Connor looked toward him, then back at Tessa, desperation flickering. "I won't give up," he muttered, voice cracking, half defiance, half defeat. But Tessa saw it for what it was, desperation, not devotion. "This conversation is over," she said flatly. "If you have something else to say, send it through my lawyer." She turned. She walked toward the elevator, without looking back. He called after her. But she didn't stop. Every step she took was a choice, every inch of distance a declaration. Her steps were shaky, but her spine stayed straight. Adrenaline surged through her veins, anger, release, and something more. Victory. She had done it. She had faced the man who broke her, and stood her ground. She didn't just survive him, she rose above him. When she returned to the penthouse, Teddy was still sound asleep in his bassinet. Tessa walked over quietly and leaned down, gently brushing the soft fuzz on his head. A single tear slid down her cheek, but this time it wasn't sadness. It was purpose. She would protect him, always. Connor Blake would never hurt them again. But monsters rarely leave peacefully. What Tessa didn't know was that Connor's desperation would soon drive him toward something darker, something that could threaten everything she had fought to build. In the weeks following his unexpected visit, Tessa threw herself into motherhood and into her philanthropic dream. The Lillian Whitaker Memorial Center, named in honor of her mother, was nearly ready to open, housed in a beautifully restored townhouse in a family-friendly Denver neighborhood. With Natalie's help, Tessa oversaw every detail, from scheduling parenting workshops and counseling sessions to building partnerships with local hospitals for referrals and ongoing support. Every shelf, every crib, every bulletin board bore her fingerprints. Each choice she made carried memory. Each room she designed echoed with the silence she once endured. Alone, pregnant, and abandoned, she didn't just decorate a building. She stitched her healing into its walls. There were nights she worked past midnight, lost in details, not because they mattered to donors, but because they mattered to her. Because once she wished someone had built a space like this for her. This wasn't just charity. This was reclamation, a mission rooted deeply in her own story, her struggle, her isolation, and her will to rise. Everett remained a steady presence. Still formal, but unwavering. He honored Tessa's boundaries while offering his support, financial and emotional. At the center's grand opening, he stood beside Tessa and Natalie as they cut the ceremonial ribbon. Cameras flashed, capturing the moment for local press. Everett gave a brief speech praising Tessa's vision and dedication to community service. The word proud left his lips, and it startled her. It was a word she hadn't heard from him in years. It lingered in the air, weighty and unfamiliar, brushing something raw inside her. For a split second, she was no longer the woman in heels and tailored silk. She was the girl who used to wait by the front door, hoping her father would show up. For a fleeting second, something passed between them. A flicker of the connection she had yearned for her entire life. It wasn't perfect, but it was something. And for now, that was enough. Yet, in the shadows of her success, a quiet unease lingered. Connor, her refusal to let him see Teddy, had clearly shaken him. More than once, she noticed a figure near the lobby entrance, someone who disappeared the moment she looked twice. There were strange calls, too. Unfamiliar numbers, silence on the other end, and a gnawing instinct in her gut, one she had learned to trust, telling her this wasn't over. Tessa was certain Connor was behind it, waiting, watching, looking for the perfect moment to strike again, like a predator circling prey. Misjudging that it had returned to find the same woman he once discarded. Inside the ballroom, she moved gracefully among CEOs, philanthropists, and public officials. Questions flowed, about the center, about her future plans. She answered each one with polished poise, her presence radiant beneath the glow of crystal chandeliers. A live orchestra played a soft waltz, while servers floated between guests, balancing champagne flutes on polished silver trays. It was a world Tessa had once avoided, an arena of wealth, power, and constant scrutiny, but now she didn't just belong in it. She owned it. Tonight wasn't just a gala, it was her stage, her emergence. About an hour in, she noticed a disturbance near the entrance. Her breath hitched. Connor. He was pushing through the crowd, panic and desperation clinging to every frantic movement. Somehow, he had slipped past the event staff, clearly intent on causing a scene. Security moved to intercept him, but Tessa raised a hand. She wanted this. Right here. Right now. Their eyes locked across the ballroom. She stood tall, poised, radiant beneath the chandelier's glow. Connor, in contrast, was disheveled. His suit was wrinkled, his eyes wild. He looked like he had sprinted through a storm, uninvited and entirely out of place. Whispers rippled through the room. Phones lifted discreetly. Cameras clicked. Tension hovered like static in the air. So this is it? Connor spat as he reached her, stopping only a few feet away. Your big revenge? Humiliate me in front of half of Denver? Tessa's lips curved into a serene, composed smile. No, Connor, she said, her voice carrying across the ballroom. I'm just living my life. You're the one who showed up uninvited. He let out a dry, humorless laugh. Living your life, surrounded by money and power, all the stuff you hid from me. You never deserved to know, she replied coldly. I wanted something real, a life based on love. That's why I kept my wealth a secret, so you'd love me. But clearly, even that wasn't enough. Her voice was steady, but her eyes burned with memory, with pain, with truth. Connor flushed. Cameras clicked again, every second captured. You're unbelievable, he muttered under his breath. Without turning, Tessa faced the crowd. Her voice was clear and unwavering. This man, she said, threw me into the street when I was 6 months pregnant. He called me worthless. Now, seeing what I've built, he wants sympathy. A collective gasp swept through the ballroom like a wave. Everett stood silently nearby, his face unreadable. Natalie gripped her phone tighter, hands trembling, not from fear, but from the gravity of the moment. Connor's eyes darted across the room, face to face, reading the expressions of shock, disapproval, judgment. Only now was he beginning to understand just how far he had fallen. He wasn't just confronting Tessa, he was confronting the empire she had built. You're twisting the story, he said, weakly. I was under pressure. Everything was falling apart. Tessa took a step forward, her eyes locked on his, cold, unrelenting. You made your choice, she said, and now I've made mine. I'm protecting my son from the man who threw him away before he was even born. Her voice cracked, but not from weakness, from strength carved by pain. She turned, snapped her fingers. Security didn't hesitate. The message was unmistakable. He didn't belong here, not in this room, not in her life, not in her future. Security moved in. They escorted Connor away, his protests echoing faintly as they faded across the marble floors. This isn't over, Connor barked as he was led out. But no one paid him any mind. His voice, once commanding, now sounded like the last gasp of a man who had lost everything. Media cameras followed him, capturing every humiliating step of his retreat. Tessa's heart pounded in her chest, but her expression never cracked. She stayed composed for the rest of the evening, even as adrenaline surged in her veins. Her hands never trembled. Her breath never hitched. Her armor held. She had proven to Connor and the world that she was no longer the frightened, penniless wife he had once thrown aside. By the end of the gala, social media was on fire. Videos and photos of the confrontation had gone viral. Headlines screamed, "Whitaker heiress confronts estranged husband in public showdown." Public opinion overwhelmingly favored Tessa. Messages of support poured in, especially from donors and supporters of the Lillian Whitaker Memorial Center. Even former skeptics who had questioned her philanthropic motives praised her composure and courage in calling out Connor's past cruelty. People called her a symbol of survival, of strength, of reinvention. And yet, for all the validation, something still felt hollow deep inside her. Yes, revenge brought satisfaction, but it didn't undo the past. It didn't erase the memory of the rain-soaked night he cast her out, the whispered pleas, the betrayal. That night, back at the penthouse, Tessa fed Teddy his bottle and rocked him to sleep. Tears slipped silently down her cheeks as she whispered to him, "You'll never have to beg for love. You'll never wonder if you're enough. You'll never know that kind of pain, my love. I promise." In the days that followed, Connor vanished from public life. Whispers swirled. He'd been fired from his job after the gala debacle. Gossip columns reported that the woman he had been dating had left him, unwilling to stay tied to a man disgraced in front of an entire city. One headline trended for days, from deal closer to door slammer. Tessa should have felt triumphant, but instead, she felt empty. She had expected a finish line. Instead, there was only silence. Maybe that's the final sting of revenge, she thought. It leaves nothing behind. Still, life moved forward. Teddy cooed and giggled, his laughter breathing joy into every quiet space. The center flourished, providing care and support to dozens of mothers in need. Tessa and Everett continued to grow closer, slowly, steadily, bridging the years of emotional distance. As her work gained national attention, invitations rolled in, conferences, summits, keynote events. Tessa accepted them all with humility, always centering her mission. By the time the custody hearing date arrived, her story was back in the headlines. Whitaker heiress to face estranged husband in courtroom custody battle. Paparazzi swarmed the courthouse steps. Their shutters clicked furiously as Tessa stepped out of a sleek black SUV, dressed in a precisely tailored suit. Her posture was calm, her expression unshakable. Her eyes were shielded behind dark sunglasses, but her posture told the world everything it needed to know. She wasn't afraid. Inside, the courtroom buzzed with hushed whispers. Connor was already seated at the defendant's table. He looked gaunt, completely out of place, like a man utterly unprepared for what lay ahead. His attorney, a weary public defender, fumbled through papers with shaky hands. Across the aisle, Tessa sat flanked by her legal team. Harold Easton and a few discreet security personnel stood behind her, unwavering. The judge entered and called the court to order. Testimonies began. Tessa's attorneys presented a strong case, with documented messages, sworn statements, and footage corroborating her claims. They detailed Connor's history of emotional abuse and neglect, especially the night he threw Tessa out at 6 months pregnant. Several neighbors took the stand, recalling the storm, the shouting, the suitcase, and Tessa's tearful departure, one hand wrapped around her belly. A staff member from the Lillian Whitaker Memorial Center testified, explaining how Connor had tried to smear the center's name, spreading false accusations of financial misconduct. Connor's defense leaned heavily on emotion. His lawyer claimed he had been under immense pressure, emotionally unstable, but now wanted to be a part of his son's life. He argued that Tessa was being cruel, using her influence to keep father and son apart. He painted her as vindictive, manipulating the system. The judge listened intently, his expression unreadable. But when the gavel finally struck, the ruling was clear. Due to Connor's erratic behavior, unstable employment, and the vulnerability of a young child, the court denied any request for unsupervised visitation. Instead, Connor was offered the possibility of supervised visitation if he could show proof of consistent rehabilitation, therapy, employment, and meaningful financial contributions to Teddy's welfare. Tessa stepped out of the courthouse victorious. Her heart still raced, but her resolve never wavered. Cameras flashed. Reporters called her name. She kept her gaze forward, her head high, her arms gently wrapped around Teddy's small form. If Connor wanted to be a father, he'd have to fight for it, legally, ethically, and consistently. And Tessa doubted he had the strength or discipline to follow through. Time would tell. Back at the penthouse, Everett Whitaker met her with a rare, sincere embrace. "Well done, Tessa," he said simply. She melted into the hug for just a moment, realizing how far she had come. From a frightened woman cast out into a thunderstorm, to a mother who had just secured her child's future in a courtroom full of history. Later that evening, after laying Teddy down for a nap, Tessa stood at the massive penthouse window. The Denver skyline twinkled against the night. Her thoughts drifted to a younger version of herself, unsure, anxious, desperate for love. She never could have imagined this life, forming alliances, running a growing nonprofit, shaping policy at Whitaker Global Holdings. Life had taken her through fire, but it had forged something unbreakable. Natalie arrived with takeout and bottles of sparkling cider. They toasted over a quiet dinner, laughter echoing through the penthouse. "To Tessa Whitaker," Natalie declared, lifting her glass. "The fiercest mom in the Mountain West," Tessa laughed, warmth blooming in her chest. "I'll take that title," she said gladly. In the weeks that followed, Connor never scheduled a single supervised visit. Word eventually reached Tessa that he had left Denver, possibly to start fresh in another city. Maybe he had finally accepted defeat, or maybe he was scheming something new. But if he was, she no longer lost sleep over it. For now, Tessa had peace. She was free to pour her energy into the people who truly mattered: Teddy, her father, her mission, and the small, trusted circle of friends who had stood by her through everything. The chaos Connor brought into her life had been replaced with meaning, structure, and a kind of quiet joy she once thought impossible. Her relationship with Everett continued to evolve. The past wasn't forgotten, but it no longer held them hostage. They bonded over Teddy's milestones, his first attempts at crawling, his bubbling babble, the way he gripped their fingers like lifelines. Everett even accompanied Tessa on visits to the foundation, donating supplies and quietly mentoring young fathers who showed true interest in stepping up. Sometimes Tessa would catch a softness in his eyes when Teddy babbled "Pa," and though they never spoke of it aloud, she sensed something healing in Everett too. For the first time, Tessa saw something in him she once thought impossible, a willingness to grow. Meanwhile, board meetings at Whitaker Global Holdings became more receptive to Tessa's ideas, especially those centered on employee well-being and ethical partnerships. James Caldwell, the longtime board member who had spoken so warmly of Lillian, became one of her strongest allies. Under their influence, the company began channeling significant funds toward underserved communities, a dramatic shift from its old, profit-first mentality. Still, Tessa never let her momentum dull her core values. She remembered the pain, the cold nights, the loneliness. She remembered what it felt like to be discarded, to be invisible, powerless, pregnant, and pleading in the rain, and she vowed never to lose touch with that truth. She gave generously, but wisely. She didn't seek media buzz or vanity praise. She wanted impact, longevity, legacy. One crisp autumn morning, Tessa walked hand in hand with Teddy as they stepped onto the playground behind the Lillian Whitaker Memorial Center. Children squealed and tumbled on colorful slides, while mothers gathered nearby, some rocking babies, others sipping coffee and exchanging laughter. It wasn't just a center anymore. It was a sanctuary. Community bloomed here, rooted in support, in second chances, in love. Tessa's eyes landed on a young mother, standing off to the side, nervously pushing a stroller, unsure how to fit in. Without hesitation, Tessa approached. She smiled, introduced herself, gently led the girl toward a group of welcoming moms. It was a small gesture, but one that would ripple for years. Moments like this reminded Tessa why she had fought so hard. For her son, for herself, for every woman who had ever been cast aside. Teddy let out a squeal of joy as he waddled across the grass, chasing fallen leaves. Tessa felt tears sting her eyes. She thought of Connor for only a moment, wondering if he ever lay awake at night regretting what he had thrown away. But the thought passed quickly. Her life, their life, was better without his shadow. There was a future to build, a future radiant with possibility, one not born of wealth, but of healing. Lit by the strength she had found in herself and the boundless, unconditional love she gave and received every day. She looked down at Teddy and whispered, "We made it, baby boy. We really did." In that quiet moment, with the autumn leaves rustling and the laughter of children echoing around the playground, Tessa knew her story had shifted. From tragedy to triumph, from a rain-soaked doorstep to sun-dappled grass beneath her child's feet. Tessa Whitaker, once a frightened, cast-aside pregnant woman, had become the author of her own future. And no one, not even the man who tried to break her, could take that away. Not after everything she survived. Not after everything she rebuilt with bare hands and a bruised heart. Tessa's journey reminds us that even in our darkest hours, resilience and love can lead us toward the light. She began as a humble wife, blindsided by betrayal, but through perseverance and the unexpected inheritance of a billionaire legacy, she unearthed her power, rewrote her fate, and built something meaningful. Not for praise, not for revenge, but for the little boy whose life would begin where hers had almost ended. The mother she became, the protector, the provider, the beacon for others in pain, is a testament to the strength we all carry inside. Because sometimes, the most powerful stories begin with being broken and choosing to rise anyway. So our story has come to a close. And now, dear friends, our wonderful community, if you're still here, listening to these final words, something in this journey must have touched your heart in a way words can't always explain. Tessa's path wasn't one paved with ease. She was betrayed, abandoned, and pushed to the edge, yet she chose to rise. Not just for herself, but for her child, and for every silent voice she once represented. Her transformation reminds us of something powerful. Rock bottom isn't the end. As the Stoics say, the obstacle is the way. What breaks you can also build you. You see, life doesn't always come with warnings or soft landings. Sometimes it tears us apart quietly. And yet, we find strength not because we want to, but because we must. Marcus Aurelius once wrote, "You have power over your mind, not outside events. Realize this, and you will find strength." Tessa did, and maybe so can you. This story wasn't just about heartbreak or legacy. It was about reclaiming identity, about choosing healing over hate, resilience over revenge. And in a world that often tells us to stay broken, Tessa showed us that it's possible to rebuild. Gracefully, powerfully, and on your own terms. So if you're holding on to something fragile, if you're standing in a storm like she once did, wondering if the pain has a purpose, know that it does. Your story isn't over. If this journey stirred something inside you, please take a moment to like this video, share it with someone who needs hope, and subscribe to our channel. Because someone out there, maybe just like you, is waiting to hear this story. And always remember, healing isn't a destination, it's a decision, a daily choice to rise, even when it's hard. Thank you for staying with us. Until next time, stay strong.